welcome to Oh What a Lovely Podcast, the show where popular culture meets the First World War. I'm Angus Wallace, and joining me as ever are Jessica Meyer and Chris Kempshall. Can friendship be stronger than war? Well, in this episode, we test that when we look at The Grizzled, a cooperative card game produced by Pöhlmann. Is that how we're going to say their name? Pöhlmann.com. There's a ring to it. Published in 2014, The Grizzled is about surviving the trenches during the First World War. The players will win or lose together. The story to the game, or the backstory to the game, is that on the 2nd of August 1914, young men from a small French village gather in a town square in stunned silence to contemplate the general mobilisation order plastered to the door of the town hall. Soon they will leave everything they know to head to boot camp for training and then to the war. I bet you didn't get that, Jessica, from when we played it.
Nope. No, it was definitely a case of being chucked into the front line with no basic training at all.
So each round, the current team leader chooses how many cards every player draws. Then, going round the table, players must either play a card in their hand or withdraw from the mission. Each card represents either a threat to the team, such as artillery fire, gas, weather conditions, or trauma cards such as frightened or obsessive. At the end of the round, more cards are added to the draw deck. The war only ends for the players if they can use up all the cards in the deck before the time runs out. If one threat shows up too many times, the team fails the mission. The team must play their threats correctly in order to gain any progress. Now, the cards are lavishly illustrated by the French artist Tignou, a member of the group Cartoonists for Peace. He was the staff cartoonist at the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. He was sadly killed in the terrorist attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices in 2015. So, The Grizzled, where do we begin? Perhaps one of our first impressions. Now, this is I appreciate, Jessica, this is odd for you because Chris and I have both got a very lavish little box set, and when we played with you, we played the online version.
Perhaps you should explain to our audience what we did earlier this week, which was, what was the platform you used, Chris?
So, I mean, obviously the starting point says that, as this is going out in January, all of us sat down on Christmas Day, and we played The Grizzled together as one big, oh, what a lovely podcast family. And the game is available as a computer game version through Steam. You can play it individually by yourself, or you can play online with your friends. It's obviously, as Angus was saying, it's a cooperative game. So all of us sat down on Christmas Day, and I shared my screen to Angus and Jessica, and collectively we played through me various games of The Grizzled, effectively setting up the trauma that's going to come for Jessica in particular when we play War Hospital.
I have to say that
in the coming weeks.
We did play this
as a little test run
at the start of the week, and we are now at the end of the week. Well, Christmas. Monday,
we played it on Christmas. Don't worry.
It's now Friday. But the fact that we are all still speaking to each other is, answers Angus's first question. I suppose we have been forged by the fire and come through. None of us have shot the other one in the back yet.
I've had The Grizzled for years, and I've had the opportunity to play it a few times because I suspect I've mentioned on here before. It turns out, surprisingly, not that many of my friends want to play First World War games with me, but I've always really liked it. I mean, Angus was talking about the art style. It is beautiful. Both the computer version and the tiles, the physical version. The art is just gorgeous, and really, it's got a ton of personality in it. With the description of young men going off to war,
it was definitely The Grizzled. They were Poilu.
They were young guys. That's another extra little thing. The original version of this game is called Le Poilu, and The Grizzled doesn't mean the same thing as Le Poilu. There's a weird thing going on there. But as a cooperative game, it's surprisingly compelling. Even now that we've finished, I played various games myself to prepare for it, to show Angus and Jessica. I still keep going back to it to play some more. Because
Well, I've been back a few times and have not yet survived the war with my comrades. And that's on the easy. I don't know which front was the easy front.
War is hard.
That was on the easy. On the easy front, and me and my comrades have not managed to survive the war.
You were in Flanders rather than at the Shamanta Dam. Yeah, indeed.
Or in Switzerland.
What I do find funny is that whole thing about the setup about the which is in the rules, explaining about the whole village square thing, which is when you play it, you have no idea of that sort of setup, unless you're the one person of the four playing to have, or three or four playing to have read the rules. It's sort of lost on you.
There's also probably worth flagging up that we played the amended, updated version, which is called Armistice Edition, which has a campaign in it that you play through, and it's kind of got slightly like a legacy aspect, so that every campaign mission you play slightly changes what happens further on. I haven't had a chance to play that yet, but there is a fair amount of playability in it, and like a storyline.
Well, I was going to say one of my oddities to it was, because I only played the basic game and not the campaign, was it did seem to lack a sort of a narrative arc. It didn't place you anywhere particularly. I was trying to think of other sort of war games, and or games set in war. And if you think of like Cold, it's set in a place in time. There's a map that you see what's going. That's not there. There's almost no narrative arc to it either. It's like this weird grind of, oh, it's shells. Oh, we're going over the top, which is represented by a whistle. Oh, we're being gassed. Oh, it's happened again. Oh, and you're like, oh, but there's no.
It's everywhere and nowhere.
And actually, the game started to come to life for me when we started to go. Oh, we're at Verdun again. And when we were adding on that our own knowledge. It suddenly become quite exciting. I do wonder if you played it with people who had no interest in the First World War and weren't imprinting that on them, whether it would be so exciting, which perhaps is easier for the French to do than perhaps us.
I can confirm that having played it with people who aren't First World War historians, it's not as exciting for them. And they're not as eager to go back to it as I was.
I should say, even playing as someone who is interested in the First World War, I do find it quite fun. I also found it incredibly stressful.
Yeah. The mechanics of it work really well. So the idea is you keep putting down cards, and if you get cards with 3 matching symbols in no man's land, which is the playing area, at the same time, then the mission fails. And the game itself is composed of basically endless missions until you either win or you die. So, when there's several artillery shells down and you've only got like an artillery shell in your hand, you can choose to withdraw and leave the game or leave that mission, but you hold on to that card, and that has an impact onto how many cards are going to be dispersed in the next round. So there's various kind of interlocking strategies.
Which last time I played, we got down to one of them having one. I got down to one of them having one card left. I'm thinking, if he just play the bloody card, just play the card, we're going to win, we're going to survive. And for 3 rounds, he refused to play the card. And it was only afterwards I realised he'd got too many traumas, so he couldn't play the card. So it must be a trauma, and no one lifted the trauma. Now, this is the other thing it adds. It adds sort of an idea of, well, there's morale, trauma, and support. Support is through offering some hot beverage, which interestingly we imprinted as tea until someone queried it, and then we thought, would the French be drinking tea? Perhaps it's coffee. I can clarify that the rules don't tell you what that hot beverage is. I did look through earlier.
But it's not pinot, that's for damn sure.
The French, you do rather expect it to be wine.
Yeah, 100%.
If it was the British, it would be tea. Absolutely. Recently, Radio 4 has been plugging, is it Safram Sangara's Empire of Tea, which was Book of the Week, I guess, or has filled one of its short slots over the course of an entire week. And I think it's Dan Snow. They don't tell in the plug who's saying how important tea was on the front line and the home front. And I think it's Second World War, but I'm sort of going, yep, that applies to the First World War as well. Very much so.
A lot of French soldiers write about how obsessed the British are with tea.
Do I get to tell my British tea making story?
Oh, please do.
Yeah, so this is lovely. This I found when I was researching my PhD, actually, so years ago, in one of the memoirs, I think, at the Imperial War Museum, in which or it may have been in a letter, actually, in which the writer, during the 100 Days, when they're moving quite rapidly the British Army at this point is moving quite rapidly, and he's saying how rapid it was, but he has a moment where he walks past a couple of infantrymen and a destroyed tank, which has burnt, so the metal is red hot, or at least part of the metal is red hot, and they are using the red hot metal to boil their Tommy cookers and make tea.
Waste not, want not.
Exactly, yeah. It's beautifully written. It's a really vivid image that's stuck with me for 20 odd years, and is so British. It's exactly what the British would do.
With the support and trauma aspect, so the way that trauma works is you just get randomly dealt cards, and they might have a little lightning bolt on it, and it classes itself. I think the rules describe it as a hard knock, which will do something to you. It might mean that you can't speak at all, or to any of the other players, or that, if certain things happen, you run away, you leave the battlefield straight away, and the like, which is quite an interesting, kind of fun little way of incorporating the idea that, shell shock could happen to anyone. As Jessica will explain in a minute, shell shock is basically exactly the same thing as PTSD. It becomes a situation where you have to try and help your comrades, but at the same time, it can pay to be quite selfish to try and help yourself as well. Because if you try and help everyone, you end up helping no one. You have to be very, very kind of clear as a group who you are going to give moral support to.
They're quite subtle as well, some of these trauma. I mean, some of them are literally just, it says trauma, or you've got a fear of shells or going over the top or gas masks. But some of those cards are interested, there's panicked. There is clumsy, tyrannical, mute. There is a sort of a wide variety of potential problems that you can develop.
The fears of, shells and going over the top don't feel that irrational. It feels like I have similar fears of, being under an artillery bombardment or going over the top or, being gassed. It feels like a fairly reasonable one.
I like the idea that you can sit down, have your cup of coffee, and perhaps you might lose. Some of those fears might dissipate.
Drink enough caffeine to have the resting heart rate of a serial killer, and then suddenly all of the bad things go away.
Well, this is where we add to it by going, well, actually, maybe they're drawn out of the line. This is where almost you add your narrative to it that then justifies what's happening. But I'm not sure always that a family sitting down on Christmas Day would necessarily add that sort of role-playing narrative across the top of it.
In the same way that we did.
But, I thought it really brings it alive. And that's helped by the characterization of all the characters.
But I mean, isn't that true of the way board games of this type, which, have sort of narrative gameplay structure, are supposed to function? I'm just thinking my family doesn't play the Grizzled, which is why I don't have a beautiful box set. But we do play Ticket to Ride. And there are different versions. There's Europe and there's America, and there are various ways of sort of narrating what you're doing. And I think that's part of the intention, isn't it?
Yeah, there's enough there that still creates a blank canvas that you can project your own story onto it.
Which, if we're adding our own blank canvas story on, did you look up what the age recommendation is for this, Chris?
Oh, no, I didn't. Is it going to be something deeply weird?
It's 14 plus. And I was quite surprised because I would have no problem introducing it to a younger child, and there is no bits you can choke on. So I was slightly intrigued by why they felt it was 14 plus.
Maybe they meant 1914 plus.
Because it's not necessarily that complicated.
No. I wonder if it's just the material around it. The suggestion about how old do you want to introduce the First World War to your children?
But there's nothing particularly gruesome. There are shells, but the visuals, they're not shells blowing people to bits. They're just a shell sort of floating on a card. The gas mask, I mean, in that long tradition of the gas mask as inhuman, but it's not even around a face, so it's depersonalized.
No, you just don't see the end of the war.
Nobody dies. They suffer traumas, but they don't necessarily die.
No.
When you lose, you do not succeed.
And you withdraw rather than be killed. So, yeah.
Leaving it hanging, isn't it? You don't see exactly, so you've got the end of the war.
Yes.
Yeah.
Though the two symbols for kind of either winning the game or losing the game, where basically you're removing cards from the top of them to expose them. The winning one is like a dove of peace, and I think the losing one is a war memorial. with the implication that you've died. But it's an implication. It's not.
It's an implication. It's not gruesome in any way. And we have certainly talked about, particularly cartoons. I mean, I'm thinking of the Charlie Hebdo connection, but we've certainly talked about.
It's not Tardy.
It's not Tardy. It's not even Charlie's War.
We should, at some point, we've spoken about this before, we should get maybe Katrina Pennell to come on and talk about teaching the First World War at schools after the schools education project, maybe get her and Anne-Marie Einhaus on at the same time. As a sidestep of, okay, what age are we supposed to be? Is it thought to be introducing the First World War to children?
I mean, I went into a primary school and spoke to year ones, which for non-British listeners is age 6.
Had they invited you, or was you just passing by?
So this is my daughter's school. Was at the tail end of the centenary, and they were learning about Walter Tull, the footballer, who was part of the primary school curriculum at the time. And in the bath one night, my daughter mentioned to me that, they've been talking about football at the Christmas truce. Cue First World War historian rant.
So you gave her our episode with.
This is before we'd recorded it, I have a feeling. But I did then go to her teacher and say, I know what you're doing. Can I please come in and talk to them about what it really was like, rather than them getting whatever the curriculum's version of this history is? So I was talking about footballers and enlistment and Christmas on the front, but it was to 6-year-olds. But the British Department of Education thought this perfectly appropriate. Now, you don't have to approve of the Department of Education, of course.
I mean, could be, because there's an odd, actually, simulacra to the art and the gameplay with shells, whistles going over the top. The weather is either raining, snowing, or not rain,
or night.
Well, yeah, but it's quite bleak. It's a miserable scene that you've got there. There is no card that says nothing happens today.
All quiet on the Western Front.
It is fairly relentless, and they try to add an authenticity to it by telling you the characters in it are all real people who some are relatives of the people who wrote the game. I'm not sure if they based the pictures on their relatives, but there are apparently, which I thought was interesting. And then I don't know. Also, Chris, you might have noticed because I'm sure you've been flicking through it. There's excerpts from letters in the rules, written in French, so it means nothing to me.
Yeah, there's little snapshots of stuff. I mean, me and Angus were talking earlier about the possibility that the game, the materials of the game, the booklets, the boxes that are quite overproduced, but there's a ton of little extra stuff that they could quite easily have not included. They could have not have put letters in the rule book. They could have not put the mobilization order on the bottom of the box. So when you take all the pieces out, you see that the conscription has begun or kind of mobilization has begun. They could have not done that, and yet they did. Clearly, they decided that it adds something to the atmosphere and environment around the game rather than necessarily to the game itself.
So how successful has this been in terms of sales? Do we know?
It was pretty successful, I think. I mean, certainly successful enough to get an expanded edition.
Well, I think if it's been out for 10 years and you could still buy it, I think that's must show it's fairly successful, or they overproduced too many.
Yeah.
Still selling them.
But I think Chris's point about the expanded edition is probably the right one.
When did the expanded edition come out? 2018?
Let me have a look. Yeah, it might well be.
It wins all the awards in 2015, so I'm sure it comes out in 2014. So it's...
Yeah, it is 2018.
It's kind of convenient that they're bookending the war when they release it.
Yeah, the Centenary was really helpful for quite a lot of games developers.
I'm not sure if you can still get the Centenary version either, the extended, with all the little men in. I think that's now quite collectible.
Well, from my cold dead hands, obviously.
I think they only do the regular ones that I've got, the Pöhlmann's version, which is still quite extravagant for.
I think it's something like £15-20 or something like that. It's not expensive, I don't think.
I forgot to check that. Yes, £20, 20 English pounds.
That's not bad at all.
And 50 English pounds for the extended set, or the Armistice set, or what's it called?
Armistice Edition.
Armistice Edition with the little men in. Basically, you're paying for little men.
What are the purpose of the little men, having only played this on screen?
So there's 6 of them, which I think is very interesting. Given, again, I haven't played through the full campaign yet, and I haven't looked ahead in the rulebook for the campaign because when I do play it, I don't want to spoil it for myself. But you normally play with 4 people, as we did when we played it online. The fact that there are 6 little men, I think, very strongly suggests that some of them aren't going to make it.
All the artwork's for 6, though. I've noticed
all the artwork is for 6, so you just pick 4 random out of the 6. But yeah, I'm going to guess that they just kind of add in a little bit of extra personality for when you're playing through the campaign thing. You can get, reasonably attached to your
little man,
independent Poilu.
The leadership thing is quite interesting because it rotates.
Yes.
So you're playing at the level of the platoon rather than
like anything bigger.
So it's not a grand strategy game in that sense. There is no hierarchy. And Chris, you're going to have to come in as the expert on the French army here. There is a hierarchy in the French army, I seem to recall.
Yeah, they there are definitely people who are more important than others.
And there are generals who can order various people to be shot for mutiny circa 1917. So
they definitely can do that.
I wonder if there could be a British game that was designed without any rank. But I'm fascinated that that's the way they decided to do this.
Yes. I mean, from a games mechanics point of view, it makes very, very good sense that, whoever's making the decisions, it rotates. There are loads and loads of games like that. But to effectively mean then that all 4 of the people playing are clearly of the same rank, it's just this depends who is placed in charge of the mission at any given point, does make it quite kind of interestingly egalitarian almost in its own kind of everybody equal.
But could that be because it's not a war game? It's not about tactics on the battlefield. It's about managing endurance, which means that you have friends who amongst themselves, independent of any command structure, are just managing their wartime experience together with one another.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think so. A good period ago, we had Jon Fenice come onto the podcast to talk about computer game Valiant Hearts, and one of the things that I've said about Valiant Hearts various times is that whilst in Valiant Hearts, you control somebody in the French army and you control somebody in the German army, the enemy in Valiant Hearts is the war. And that is exactly true of the Grizzled. You are not fighting the Germans. The Germans aren't in the game. You're not, trying to win the war. You're trying to survive the war, which isn't the same thing. So I think it's that aspect. It's not a combat First World War military game. It's a game of survival against the war rather than being against the Germans.
Or to quote from the rulebook, players are offered a chance to feel some of the difficulties suffered by soldiers in the trenches.
Did we feel those?
I tend to think they're overplaying their hand a bit on that one, but,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking back to the traumas you're listing there, Angus, and a lot of them are associated with traumatic shock. I'm not going to charge at your red flag, Chris, and start talking about PTSD, but, it is the sort of thing that was at the time associated with shell shock. Hysterical mutism was a very well-known or well-recognized by the general populace, at least, a symptom. The tyrannical one was interesting because that sort of implies a hierarchy, but there isn't anything like cold or wet feet.
Or lost an arm, or there's nothing bodily happens to you.
Yeah. Or just flat out exhausted.
No, you're right. They're all sort of mental traumas rather than physical.
Or personality disorders. Sorry, I'm back to the tyrannical again.
But perhaps that's because they're, if I not say curable, liftable. Whereas if you have your arm blown off, it can't really be cured by having a hot cup of coffee.
But wet feet, at least, maybe you need some whale oil rather than and better socks. That's the sort of thing when you read through letters home, when you read enough letters home, these are the sorts of things that come up again and again when people are talking about the conditions in the trenches being horrible. It's seeing, the dead, which you could do because you move to a quiet sector and you stop seeing somebody's skull grinning out of the trench at you. But it's also things like muddy, wet feet, freezing cold, not enough food, the water tastes of petrol because it's come up in the petrol tins, or of lime because it's been disinfected. They have dysentery. There are physical living conditions. And Chris, you and I have written something for the 1914-18 Encyclopedia about those sort of experiences. And yes, there's a brief section in there where we talk about trauma and psychological trauma more particularly, but most of what we're writing about are
discomforts, annoyances.
And it was life. It was day-to-day life.
But do you think if we licensed it and did the British version with wet feet or water, that people would just take it as the British being light-hearted about war? It's not grim enough.
French foot is definitely something that exists in our popular consciousness.
And lack of sleep.
Because even, as you said, a card that says exhaustion covers quite a lot, just as a term, from, absolute raging battle fatigue to I can't sleep because, my bunk is sodden with water or it's covered in lice or...
No rats or lice. Lice comes up again and again. And the thing is, you could then vary the comfort. So, hot cup of tea, hot bath, that would be a good one. Nice thick pair of socks sent from home. Or, mail package. You could do something for the entire group.
Yeah, letters from home. Remove trauma from everyone.
You could have sort of a wild card cure everyone by the mail delivery.
Are we basically becoming contractually obliged to create a British version of this?
How much would it cost contract to license this?
Tommy's.
But it wouldn't be called Tommy's. It would be called like the Lions or something like that. Something.
No, God, no. That's
I wouldn't want it to be, but that's how it would end up being called. Well,
it can't be because that's anachronistic. I'm sorry. It would have to be. It would have to be Tommy's. I'm afraid.
It would have to be Tommy's. But once marketing gets involved, then you live or die with what they want.
Yeah, but I think even marketing must be aware that Tommy's is a highly recognisable brand.
I think if there's a British version, you'd have to tie it into the Somme as well. In fact, you just call it the Somme because the people go, First World War.
I wonder if you do because as we pointed out, this doesn't talk about Verdun, which would be the obvious reference point, I assume, Chris, or would it be something else?
It would be Verdun.
But it would be interesting, rather than thinking of the whole war, if you did a British version, say, and you just call it the Somme, it's like, can you survive the Somme? Rather than the whole war is quite a big thing, it would feel perhaps more relevant to a British audience to directly link it to something that supposedly, everybody's family is connected to, there's all so much hyperbole.
But if you want to, I'm interested in the First World War, says someone whose great uncle served at Passchendaele or Gallipoli or, somewhere that wasn't the Somme necessarily.
Everyone served at the Somme in your family history.
I've seen Who Do You Think You Are?
I've just been through everything. I cannot believe there is not a rat in any of the artwork. It's the kind of cheeky thing that would just fit somewhere. And there's not even one sat under a bench.
And there are several pipes. There was a cigarette, wasn't there, in the online art?
Yeah, there's cigarettes and smoking and pipes and the like.
Of the 6, 2 are smoking cigarettes and 2 are smoking pipes.
No playing cards either. When men were sitting around in the trenches being bored stiff, which they were for about 75%
they played cards.
of the time, they gambled.
We could have a slightly kind of extra card of like for the support of visit to a brothel, and then that raises the morale of the whole.
What you might miss of the group picture though on the front of the box is that it's meant to be a picture because on the reverse is the same group in their civvies as a portrait.
Is that before or after the war?
Before. They all look younger.
Before, because they're young lads. That's before the war. So they're all clean shaven, and that's afterwards
they become
where they're
grizzled.
Grizzled.
So we don't have the group of tourists returning to the front line for a 1924 pilgrimage to their fallen comrades.
No. This is obviously the group who meet at the Down Square in 1914. Is the rear picture as one of them's got a pair of shorts on.
Which means that you could do a version of like Powell's Battalion for the British side, and then you'd have to send them to the Somme.
Yes, the pals you would.
Something else actually that occurred to me when I was playing it earlier and faffing around with the rules, and you've alluded to it, Chris, is the fact that there's a peace card. And so as the game plays, you have to put cards on this peace deck that you then remove cards from. The idea is, I like the idea that you reveal peace. But what becomes slightly stressful is when you haven't got many cards on and you can almost touch peace, but there's still cards on top, and you think, no, we're going to fail. We can see the end, but we're not quite there. I thought it was quite a good visual representation of what it must have felt like towards the end of the war, when you know it's gonna end, but you're not quite there and you're not sure when.
Yeah, well, when we played, we had the peace card got revealed several times, but we couldn't win the missions and clear all of the cards in order to secure it. So then you get dragged back into the war again.
So you've sort of got to the 10th of November and failed 1918.
It was very dispiriting. I thought we were doing quite, because we kept on having successful missions.
Yeah, but we weren't getting rid of enough cards.
Yeah, but we won the battles and lost the war, which felt very German somehow.
Well, but it's because you these traumas that slowly you can struggle to deal with. You can deal with the shells, you can deal with the gas, you can deal with the weather, but it's the traumas that start to wear you down.
Yeah, which is a really clever mechanic given the conception.
Which is why it remains slightly bizarre that they don't have things like wet feet and hunger, because that would be accurate. That is what all the literature around the 1917 mutinies. It's not sort of the big things, it's the little things that tip it over the edge, isn't it? And do we have a good text for our reference list for that, Chris? Because
oh god, yeah, undoubtedly so.
Trolling my memory. I'll leave that to you to supply.
Whether or not how feasible it would be, but I think it would be really interesting and fun to get a number of copies of this and play it at the First World War Society conference or something like that with people who wanted to just. But I mean, you don't even necessarily need to, then come back together and talk about it and, pick it to pieces afterwards. I just think it would be interesting to watch a bunch of First World War historians play it.
I can say this, whatever time we're recording this, that I'm no longer in charge of organising the Society conferences. So, given our president-elect is in the room, I'm going to hand that one over to you, Chris.
You can have a games afternoon, Chris. board game afternoon at the next conference.
Genuinely, I think would be quite interesting. And the way that I think you could frame it is that, Jessica had never played this before. Angus, you were kind of roughly familiar with it. I had played it before. It doesn't take that long to get to grips with it, which means that there's definitely a really interesting teaching tool in this game about getting students to play it and then coming back and going, okay, what is this trying to tell us about the First World War? Or, even the French experience of the First World War, what information is it trying to transmit to us? And the easiest way to turn it into a teaching tool is to get the teachers to play it.
The hard part of the game is the fact that you're not playing to win, you're playing to win amongst everybody. And I actually think that's quite a hard concept for many people who play games.
Yes. That you're not trying to crush your opponents.
It's a different switch that has to be flipped. But actually, in this instance, it's what makes the game, that you're having to look out for your pals. You're having to choose who you give the support to so they can lose a trauma, so they can, have that cup of generic hot beverage.
Can I ask something? This occurred to me in the interim between our playing the game and making this recording, that when we were doing it online, the traumas were marked by a little red tick in the box of the player with the trauma, which is clearly something that works very effectively online. How does that work in live?
So I'm pretty sure you put the trauma card face up in front of you and it's got that little lightning bolt on it.
Right, because that is a difference, because you can't automatically see what the trauma is that someone's suffering from online the way you can.
Yeah, you have to click through a couple of bits.
So that made it perhaps slightly less collaborative. Because we spent a lot of time debating about what trauma someone had towards the end.
Yes, trying to figure out which was the most advantageous to get rid of for them. Whereas in person, you'd just be able to read it off the card.
But we worked out there was one of the traumas that meant that even giving him our vote, because it's done on our vote system for giving support, and support only goes to the individual with the most votes. And if the votes are split evenly, nobody gets the support. And there was at least one occasion where we couldn't work out why someone with only one trauma was getting the support, except that their trauma was more amenable to support than the one with 3 ticks or whatever it was.
And some of the traumas mean that you always play your own support card on yourself. You become selfish, or that, you always get more support because of something or other, which then kind of twists the dynamic of the group a little bit, which adds a little extra kind of consideration into it.
I've just realised that the war memorial on the back has all the characters' names on.
So they all die.
So you either all survive or you all die.
No pressure.
You all get to the end, or you're all on the war memorial in your little village.
We're not even talking about decimation here.
Yeah, the Italian version of this would be great fun. Just point at somebody around the group and say, I'm really sorry, but little one for Vanda there.
Got anything else to reflect upon?
I think that when people are listening to this in January, it's going to be dark and it's going to be cold, it's going to be miserable outside. I think it's a game that's worth picking up and playing, and it will almost certainly be over by Christmas if you start now.
That said, I've never not survived the war. The few games I've had in this week.
But this podcast has survived.
This podcast has survived, despite Angus's clear lack of esprit de corps.
Well, we discovered who leads from the front, certainly. Angus might at one point have risked a bullet in the back.
Yeah, if you're going to be brave.
But it's an interesting game. Just remind me, when was it first published?
2014.
Very interesting game.
Which is another one of those signs that, I think we've discussed previously, that actually, as soon as the 12th of November 2018 rolled around and everyone started asking, what have we learned from the centenary? I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to process all the stuff that happened in the centenary and learn what actually happened.
But there's also the element of it, given the extension, and I don't know how you write, all the stuff that certainly I was doing, and I suspect you were doing as well, Chris, during the centenary, of opening out the history from the story we thought that everybody knows. There may just not be the capacity, but there aren't any war hospitals. We've already noted there's not major physical trauma. There's no enemy. There's huge amounts that we were talking about during the centenary that this game can't touch on. And what we possibly need to do alongside, or maybe as part of a mini-series with Katrina and Anne-Marie, who are looking at how the war was taught in Britain, is find a French historian to talk about what was going on in France. And of course, certainly the German, but I suspect also the French memory of the war is fundamentally different, partly because of what happens in the Second World War, but also because of their relationship to the EU. So we could have a fun time talking about Brexit.
You ruined the First World War for us.
Sorry.
So that's the Grizzled. It's well worth picking up from your local friendly game store. I think we had a team chat on Monday. We seem to have almost, 3 or 4 ideas of where we're going into the new year, which all seemed quite exciting. And then I sat down to think about them. I thought, well, that we've got theatre trip, and then my mind went blank.
So we were vaguely thinking about maybe getting Alison Bennett on to talk about the topics of her conference paper.
But shortly after this comes out, the long-threatened war hospital is being released.
The long-threatened war hospital is being released.
So I think we might have to use the appropriate metaphor, bite the bullet. Do some surgery on this one. I'm
so hyped to play War Hospital. I think it's such a weirdly interesting idea. Just as a complete aside, a brand new First World War game has just been released, which I had no concept of it coming. And it's called The Last Train Home. And it looks very much like you are either Russian or German soldiers trying to make your way back through the Civil War in 1918, 1919. It's a lot more combat-y. It's a strategy game, but what a wild, amazing concept for a computer game that, again, if you'd have asked me, do you reckon this will be a thing just before the First World War centenary? Well, no, why would it be? No one's heard of any of this.
That said, though, it's a slightly what might jump out at you as an odd setting to play around the First World War, but in the whole war games miniatures world, there is a whole set of gaming in that kind of Central European, going into Turkey, that kind of post-war fighting, and the game right now escapes me, but I think there's a few of them.
Yeah, I've heard something about like Legion LARP or something like that, about kind of bits and pieces like that. But yeah, it sounds very much like Robert Gerworth, the digital edition. Which...
Legion Lap sounds like something you do at a weekend dressed as a soldier, sort of French reenacting.
Yeah, it does.
I'm hoping this might turn into a mini gaming series. Whether or not we engage with the Civil War after war hospital, I might be too traumatized at that point.
I think that will also be a trickier one to cooperatively play, because in the process of having the conversation about what to do with your guys are going to get killed, which in its own way has got like a certain
die on the table in front of you.
A certain historical realism to it. But forcing Jessica to make a variety of, high octane surgical decisions sounds a lot more fun.
Who might be the medical historian but has absolutely no medical training, so clinical knowledge nil.
Which would be interesting to see what a doctor's opinions of it would be.
Yeah, do we know any trauma surgeons? Do we want to?
No, they'll be scratching their head in a completely different manner. Very good. Well, I think that's all from us for now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, Happy New Year, everybody.
We look forward to more First World War and popular culture in the coming year.
Indeed. Happy New Year, everyone. Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, it's a lovely war. Oh, we roast with eggs and ham when we got plum and apple jam. From